did write a little something, but I'm just gonna, I appreciate everybody coming together to have this discussion, a healthy discussion, and to be able to see both sides of this divisive issue. I am for the monument, actually, but not the location of it. It's a beautiful monument. It was constructed beautifully. It has amazing history, but to a certain group of people, it is offensive. I haven't had the luxury to travel to Germany, but I did go to New York and visit the Holocaust Museum. I'm not Jewish, but going through that and learning about what they went through and what actually happened, I felt something. And I know I have enough respect, enough decency not to wear a swastika or a Hitler shirt or anything like that in public, because it will offend Jewish people. So it's the symbolism of it. It's not removing it, it's not to remove the history, because the history is what it is. And we honor history by reading about it and sharing it and keeping it going. So we truly honor history by just learning from it, period. But if there's a symbol that is offensive to people, a certain group of people who have to go to a courthouse that represents justice, and to look at that symbol and what it represents, I mean, we all have our opinions and how we view things, but historically, when people were disenfranchised or lynched or hurt or intimidated, it was a tool of intimidation. And every massive lynching, it was a symbol of hate, and that was one of the symbols of hate that was there to reinforce that ideology. And I'm not against anyone standing for what they believe in. We all have that right. But first of all, be inclusive and be respectful and sensitive, just humanity, not a black or white issue, not even the Confederate in the Union. It's just decency, and if it's offensive, I would show that respect to my fellow citizen and not do that. Relocate it in a place, revere it in a different place, but not in a neutral location that every citizen has to walk on. That's all.
History is complicated. That monument is definitely a commemoration of those who sacrificed in the Civil War. And the men who put it up in the early 20th century would probably roll over in their graves if they heard me say it. But there were African Americans who fought for the Confederacy. There was one, and I'm sure some of these gentlemen up here can tell me the name. There was a man who was a slave and went with his owner into battle, served with him. When he was shot, he carried him to a medical facility.
Levi Carney.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's how it works. We do appreciate it.
And then when his owner died, he went back to that regiment to fight. And he served with another officer in that same regiment. And he's buried in a military cemetery in DeSoto Parish. So my point is, it's complicated. History is very complicated. I don't know what the intention was of putting it up there. If it was white supremacy, I'm sure for some it was. But again, it's complicated. The Civil War definitely was fought for slavery. If you don't know that, talk to Lincoln, because Lincoln said somehow slavery is the cause of this war. Whether we're talking economic, slavery was part of the economy. Whether we're talking about sectionalism, it was a part of this part of the country. It was cultural. It was political, the Three-Fifths Compromise. I mean, it's all through history. But again, history is complicated. I like having that monument there because it does provoke discussion. I don't want anybody offended by it. I am very glad they took down the Confederate flag. I thought that was very appropriate. I would love to see that monument remain where it is. And as others have said, another monument added to it. I would love to see a statue to a man by the name of Claude Underwood, who went off to World War II, served his country bravely, came home, tried to register to vote, had to take a white person to vouch for him. And this was in the days of the literacy test. he had to answer the question, how many bubbles are in a bar of ivory soap? Of course, there's no answer. He was told he was incorrect, and he was sent away. He came back day after day and was asked the question again, and the answer changed every day. He kept doing it. He got his voting registration. He became a voter in Caddo. That happened at that courthouse. I'd like to see a statue to Mr. Underwood. Capitol in Washington has Statuary Hall. Let's have a statuary garden. There are a lot of people that need to be honored here. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Caleb Holmes, and as a part of the younger community, I've been in Shreveport since I was a baby, so this is all I know. This is home for me. And, you know, regardless of the passions and the emotions and the opinions, history is history. We can't change it. But we also have to realize what this monument actually stands for, and that it offends a huge segment of our population. And nobody out here is, talking about burning it or breaking it down. We want to put it in a place that is educationally and culturally appropriate for everybody, so we can learn from history, so we don't repeat it, but we learn from it in the correct context. And that should not be in a neutral place in the halls of justice where we all have to go to see things changed in our beautiful parish. So it should be moved to a place, in a museum, in a park, something that tells the story of our country from day one till now and continue the story into the future. But for us to sit here and frankly deny is an act of intellectual dishonesty. The monument stands for a region of the country that left the United States for the sole reason of keeping people down and abusing their human rights, not U.S. rights, human rights. So let's all be intellectually honest here and move the monument to a safer place, of course, but also to make sure that we tell the story in an intellectually honest way. And so that way us and the younger generation, we can only say, hey, we did something in Shreveport. We weren't last for once. We actually made a change and did something good, and we were ahead of the curve. So that's my opinion, and I would strongly advise the chair, consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Patty Underwood.
I want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to come out and voice our opinions. I came out to voice my support for keeping the statue and keeping the statue where it is, where it was placed. I'd like to read to you all, I had written a letter, and I think that in the letter this presents my basis for my opinion pretty succinctly. There was a bill, House Bill 71, that was up recently to preserve the monuments in the state, and I had written a letter to all of the representatives, and so I'd like to read this to you. I am writing to ask you to please vote yes for HB 71 when it comes to the floor. I am a 2016 history graduate of Louisiana State University in Shreveport, where I studied under Dr. Gary Joyner, Dr. Cheryl White, and Dr. Alexander Mikaberidze. My forebears, my ancestors, have fought in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans, the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. My children's paternal grandfather lost his life in the Korean War. Some members of my family gave their lives in defense of our country. The historic monuments have been lovingly created and placed to commemorate these truly consequential events and people by those who succeeded them, those who knew well their sacrifices and their valor, in order that they would never be forgotten. We cannot allow the capricious whims of political correctness and expedience to blot out respect for their witness. A statue of a general, for example, represents not only the individual depicted, but also every man or woman who fought under that individual. Every single monument must be protected. And I would like to add to that, that's my personal feeling from my personal family history. As a student of history, I would like to say that historians look, as we get farther and further from the time of these events and these people, we look back to the witness of the people of that time period. And if we move that statue, we will be altering the witness of the people who placed it there. I believe also that it would be immoral to do that, because we would be, the people who placed that statue there, this is their witness and their voice for the people that they knew, who fought for them.
Thank you, ma'am. Your time has expired.
They won't have a chance to come back and refuse. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for staying late this evening. I appreciate y'all's dedication to hearing everyone's thoughts and opinions on this. And I'm sure we're all hungry and cold and ready to go. But
Yes, I'm happy. No, this
thank you for staying. I'll make it quick, I promise. All right, so tonight you've heard a lot of concerns about preserving history and remembering our ancestors, and which is important to remember our heritage, and we have to learn from the lessons of history so we can make informed decisions about our future. And that's what I'm here for. Personally, I've got Confederate blood in me too. I'm related to John Wilkes Booth himself, but I don't go putting that on my resume. It's not something that I celebrate. It's not something I'm proud of. It's a part of my history, and that's where it needs to stay. But there are many other citizens of Caddo Parish whose ancestors are not being represented and respected and remembered as they should, and we need to remember that as well in making this decision. Just because they were family doesn't mean that they were right. Our Confederate ancestors were on the wrong side of history, and the fact that many people in the South refuse to acknowledge that fact is alarming. But it's not about history, it's about the future. It's about what are we teaching our children. On my card, I told you that I'm here, and not solely to represent myself, but also a community that's very important to me. I teach in the Martin Luther King area, Cooper Road area, Caddo Parish. I just want to tell you a little bit about my February this year, teaching about desegregation to a room full of black students, and it's a very awkward position to be in, teaching children about this 50-plus-year-old policy when clearly that school has not been integrated. And our schools have not been integrated because our communities have not been integrated. Our communities have not been integrated because of poor economic development, gentrification, and all of these are problems that stem from this continued white supremacist ideology, which is celebrated in front of our courthouse. That's not the place for the monument. We do need to preserve history, as we do very well in the museum, where there could be additional literature on the subject where people can see that history in its proper context. But celebrating that in front of a place of justice is not appropriate. It sends the wrong message to future generations. And I hope that we will set a good example for them and allow our upcoming youth to feel included in the American dream and in our struggle for racial equality here in Louisiana.
Thank you. Kathy Ragsdale.
Good evening, thank you for your time. I'll try and be brief. To be clear, I was born and raised in Shreveport. I grew up in Broadmoor. I'm now a homeowner here. I lived here my whole life, except for when I was in the military and after at LSU. I have ancestors that fought down in the Confederacy. Like probably many of you, I was raised on the notion that the Civil War was fought for states' rights. But the time has come to set things straight and acknowledge that slavery was the principal state right in question, and it had a major role in the Confederacy and more fundamentally our society. While it's true a minority-owned slave, the institution of slavery required the widespread cultural belief of white supremacy to function. In the years after the war, lynching and murder were a deadly serious threat to the black community. It's been over 150 years since the end of the Civil War. If we're ever truly have reconciliation, let us finally speak honestly. In fact, the same day in 1903, the police jury voted to allow the UDC, Daughters of the Confederacy, to build this monument. The Shreveport Times published an article defending the lynching and saying the burning of the stake was the acceptable method to do so. It must be noted that there were so many murders and lynchings in Caddo Parish that it earned the moniker of Bloody Caddo. In light of that past, I don't think it's unreasonable for black people or anyone to see that monument as a symbol of injustice. The fundamental issue for me is that perceived symbol of injustice is in front of a courthouse, which is supposed to be a symbolic house of justice. That is a major contradiction. Either the monument needs to move or the courthouse needs to. As it stands today, this monument is corrosive to the expectation of equal justice. There is a popular myth in Shreveport that the daughters own the plot of land. If you look back at the police jury minutes in 1903, it simply states that they reserved that land for a monument. The UDC doesn't have a clear title to the land. Honestly, if anyone else claimed ownership of land without a title, would you take them seriously? And I challenge the daughters to produce that title. I'm not here to shame or guilt anyone. I'm here because I've got children, and I owe this to them. We've come a long way since slavery, but our work isn't over. I'm here tonight to say it's long past time to move this monument to a museum, Civil War battle site, or cemetery. I'm not saying destroy it. I'm saying move it someplace. This won't solve all our problems, I'll agree. It won't end public corruption. It won't end wasteful city waste. It won't end wasteful city and parish spending, or fix our schools or criminal justice system. But this is at least a simple symbolic step that we as a people can take forward. And on a side note, I don't see why there can't be private funding for this. I'd be happy to set up a GoFundMe account for the parish and personally donate to it. I feel the need to speak today because we all have a moral obligation towards justice and reconciliation. And I hope you sign our petition and join us. Thank you for your time, and I'm proud to live in America, in a place where we can speak freely.
Thank you, sir. James Gardner.
Pardon me,
The 3 minutes started 10 seconds.
Howdy. My name is Benjamin Arnold, and I care a great deal about this issue because I love my city, and I love the state of Louisiana. I love the South, and I grew up with a great deal of pride. I grew up being told that I was related to Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, and I've never verified that, so don't quote me on it. But in evaluating the Civil War and such, every person in this room would probably have a different idea as to why the war was fought, what the objectives were, what the beliefs were and such. So we are not going to come to a consensus on the path. It's just not going to happen. So the committee is going to be in a position of really upsetting one side or the other. So I encourage y'all to consider, instead of the historical issues, consider what was in common, the common foundation. And that was economic hardship. We see it today. It exists among blacks and whites alike. And the same was true at the time of the memorial. When the memorial was built, there were still veterans from the Civil War alive. They were still walking the streets. I mean, they were only 40 years removed. So they wanted to give them a memorial that inspired unity, or gave them boosted morale. And so we need that today. We need that same commonality, because there are more things in common that we can unite on than just the memorial. And I would like to read Jefferson Davis, my Uncle Jeff's, last documented speech before he died in 1888. This is Mississippi. I won't read the whole thing, but he says, "My ambition lies buried in the grave of the Confederacy. There has been consigned not only my ambition, but the dogmas upon which that government was based. The faces I see before me are those of young men and women. Had I not known this, I would not have appeared before you. Men in whose hands the destinies of the Southland lie. For love of her, I break my silence to let it bury the dead, its hopes and its aspirations. Before you lies the future, a future full of golden promise, a future of expanding national glory, before which all the world shall stand amazed. Let me beseech you to lay aside all rancor." He's saying, just chill out.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Your time has expired.
A reunited country, he implored us for. Thank you.
Mr.
Opportunity. My name is Timothy Hunter. First of all, I want to salute everybody. so I would not come with a racial bent to this. I think you'll agree that for most of us, that the Bible speaks to the conscience of most of us, to our human conscience. If you be honest, the Bible makes a communication that as you would men do unto you, you do also unto them. Now the truth is, we've all done things to other folks that we're not proud of. But you don't celebrate the wrong. You don't celebrate immorality. You don't celebrate a time when people were abused just for their labor. You don't celebrate that by erecting a statue to. That's just not humane. So we learn to change things as we grow in time. We change laws to reflect our change of mind. We change legislations. When it was Jim Crow at one time, when you were black, go to the back of the bus, go to a white water fountain, so to speak, black water fountains. And well, when you change your mind, you change laws and you change legislation to reflect that. Well, in a similar way, our landscape can also reflect that change. Now, I've heard good talk on both sides. I got the point on both sides. But I think that there's a place for the monument. But we're not being honest as individuals. It was a time that statue, when it was built, we had no say in the matter. And you know, if you were on the side of the oppressed and the abused, you'll be offended at that monument. So there's a place for it, but it surely ought not be on the steps of the courthouse. Now, again, I love everybody, but the basis of that statue was white supremacy. The bottom line, you can hide behind words of heritage and honor, and you can do that. But if you are honest with yourselves, you know that you would not be okay if the murderers of your ancestors were celebrated. You understand that you were raised in a certain culture, and understand, but I'm saying as you become more enlightened, I was taught as a young boy, when you know better, do better. And it ought to reflect not only in our law, but it ought also reflect in our landscape. So I think the courthouse is a place where it ought not to be. I think there's a place for it. And the bottom line is this. I think that nobody ought to not consider the other person's feelings. I'm black. I don't say because you're white that I don't like it. No, I'm just saying put yourself in my shoes. I'm gonna put myself in your shoes. And I guarantee you, at the end of the day, you wouldn't say, let's just...
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Okay.
Lauren Thibodeau.
Hello, I'm Lauren Thibodeau. Thank you for having us here and listening. I propose that we replace this monument with one that celebrates something we agree on, one that unites us. We could have a monument that lists veterans from Caddo Parish from various wars that would unite our citizens and not offend certain people who enter our courthouse and desire justice. I've seen this on Mackinac Island in Michigan, and it was very interesting to read the list of veterans from their community that they were honoring. We could also have a monument for those from Caddo Parish who served in the civil rights movement. I'm sure private citizens would pay for this. Where there's a will, there's a way. If private citizens would like to take the current monument and erect it somewhere else in the area, that would be fine in my opinion too, but in front of the courthouse is not the appropriate spot. The statue was erected in 1906 during the Jim Crow law era. It celebrates what the Confederacy stood for. Yes, the Civil War was fought for states' rights, the economy, etc., but in the end, the fact that the North won is why slavery ended. People are saying taking the statue down is trying to revise history. However, I see it as standing that we're trying to revise history. Usually those who lose wars are not celebrated. When I lived in Albania, statues of Lenin and Stalin were behind the National Museum, not on display, because Albania is no longer a communist country. Louisiana is no longer a part of the Confederacy. People have said that taking the statue down will change history. People in Germany don't name children Adolf or have statues of Nazis, but it doesn't change their history. We all saw Saddam Hussein statues come down in Iraq, but it didn't change the history that had already happened. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Wyatt Porter.
My name is Mary Walker. I'm standing here today to say I support the Confederate monument, stating where it was placed in 1903 by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The plot of land where the monument stands belongs to the UDC, and the monument itself was built and paid for with funds raised by the UDC. This monument is a memorial for all the Confederate soldiers who gave the ultimate sacrifice for their beliefs. Approximately 260,000 Confederate soldiers died on the battlefields during the Civil War. Most of those bodies were left on the ground where they died, or they were buried in shallow graves at the battle site. At least half the dead of the Civil War were never identified. Families were left without knowing what happened to their loved ones. They didn't have bodies to bury and mourn. President Lincoln had the dead Union soldiers' bodies dug up for burial in national cemeteries, but the bodies of the soldiers wearing gray were ordered to be left in the ground where they lay. Thank God, a constellation of ladies' memorial associations were established to provide dignity for the Confederate dead whose remains were rotten in the battlefields. These women also raised their own funds to build hundreds of monuments and statues across the country so their loved ones would never be forgotten and there would be a place for families to mourn when they had no grave to go to. It is considered hallowed ground to those people. There were only 6 Confederate monuments in Louisiana. We just witnessed the removal of 4 in New Orleans. There are only 2 left. One is ours by the courthouse, and one is in Clinton, Louisiana by their courthouse. There is a bill that will protect the Confederate monuments, House Bill 71, which has already passed the House with a 65-31 vote. It is now in the hands of the Senate. Is it fair that this bill will pass and cause New Orleans to rush to the removal of their monuments? My question is, why is there so much animosity towards our Confederate monuments? They were built out of love and loss for our veterans during wartime, so we would never forget their sacrifice. Will the animosity continue until all memories of the Confederacy are torn down? And what will be targeted next? Will we remove the monuments of all our past presidents who owned slaves? There were a total of 12 presidents who owned slaves, including George Washington, who owned 317, and Thomas Jefferson, who owned 200. Even Ulysses Grant and his wife owned 5 slaves. I mention this only because I'm worried our country will never move past this anger. The Confederate monument was built out of love and in memory of fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands who died during the Civil War. It is in memory of our veterans who gave their lives just like any other war. My prayer is that understanding and compassion will result from these meetings. Please do not remove a part of our history. I want my children and my grandchildren to remember the sacrifice of all our veterans and to never forget my great-great-grandfathers who fought for both the North and the South during the Civil War. I am proud to be an American, and I'm also proud to be a daughter of the Confederacy. I speak this evening in the memory of my great-great-grandfather, Captain James Elgin Reese, 5th Alabama Battalion, Company C, White Plains Rangers, who fought from September 1861 until the end of the war. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Vicki Pulley. To speak on that, and if you have any written remarks, we can put those in the record, but I do want to give you the opportunity to
I've never seen.
Right, I'm sorry, my bad. If you look at these, make sure, okay?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am for the removal of the Confederate monuments. Removing the Confederate monuments from front of the courthouse will be about showing the whole world that we as a city and as a people are able to learn from our mistakes. Choose a better future for ourselves and make right what was wrong. If we don't, we continue to pay the price for injustice, division, and violence. The appeal case, the state of Louisiana versus Felton Dorson by Mr. Carl Staples, reached the Supreme Court, citing the Confederate flag and the Caddo monuments as cause for unjust verdict of Mr. Dorsey's murder trial.
In the ambulance brief by the ACLU, it gave a terrifying visual of the history that happened in Bloody Caddo, for being the most violent area in Louisiana and the last in the Confederacy, where consequences of having the Confederate flag and monuments placed at the courthouse led to the concerted effort to cleanse African Americans from this area, first physically by assaulting and murdering them, and then legally by disenfranchising them and ensuring they would live in poverty. But the most obvious of them all is the monument people of color have to walk past to go to a place that's supposed to be a place of justice for all, when in fact it hasn't and never will be as long as those monuments stand. When African Americans were given the right to vote in Louisiana after the Civil War, they were outnumbered whites in population and eligible voters. During the period from 1868 to 1874, white citizens in Caddo Parish refused to accept the Confederates' loss of the Civil War, displacement of their electoral control, and other reconstitutional reforms, and reacted with violence, intimidation, and mass murder. For me, it's not just about the monument, but where it is. It being on the front lawn of the Caddo Courthouse is the problem. It will be best served for everyone involved to, yes, treat the monument with the respect that those who hold it, though it's an embarrassment to me. Carefully find a place to install it, whether it be the Confederate graveyard, or do what New Orleans did and sell it to the highest bidder to offset the cost to remove it. But for it to remain where it is will only reflect on Caddo Parish sins against all people of color who seek justice in that courthouse. Please be very clear about this. Those that are making this decision, you will be seen as apologists to the Confederacy and the cult of lost causes if you decide to not remove it.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Ken Myers, and what I was listening to tonight, there's a lot of different opinions about what's going on. Mr. Jordan can verify that history has been distorted. I was looking at it as 1900 history book that I found. I read about, and their approach of history back then and their attitudes were a whole lot different than what we're teaching students. Listen to these young students, what they're got. I'm in favor of leaving the statue where it's at, but I think maybe it might be more appropriate to move the courthouse. There's a lot of history in that courthouse. We have an old federal building sitting down there. They have to be more reflective of a modern Caddo Parish. One lady made mention of all the hanging tree down there. We have Confederate group reunion that happened on that. And then nowhere in Caddo Parish are you going to find a place to put the Confederate statue. It will fall apart if you try to move it. And it may be just making it a museum highlighting Caddo Parish history. You can put all the monuments you want, honoring everybody on that one spot. It'd be in line with the sideboard, it'd be in line with the culture center, the art center. We would just have a museum district. And we could have a new courthouse over there, which I'm quite sure they'd be ready to get rid of, but they can't ever use it on school that owns it. And that we can move forward. That people would feel like they'd have injustice walking by that statue, would no longer have to walk by it. But they also might have a place to tell their story inside the courthouse. Because, as I said, there is no place in Caddo Parish that highlights Caddo Parish history or anything that we have to offer. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Tony Alexander, Spam. Okay, Mr. Perkins.
I'm John Perkins. I spoke last week, and I had hoped that the monument could stay there and be used as a tourist attraction by artists moving that monument through history and interpreting it and doing something like Crispo does and wrapping it in fabric, and then we could do something different. But now I'm hearing, I've actually learned from Dr. Joyner and Mr. Prime that There's an actual historic Civil War fort in Allendale that has been described, I think, by you gentlemen as the best example of a historic Civil War site in Shreveport, Louisiana, and yet the government would like to build a highway over that fort. And to see people fighting over this monument, as divisive as it is, it brought to mind the 1968 story of Uncle Jack, the good darky in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And what a terribly divisive thing was. It got so divisive that bomb threats actually moved it out of Natchitoches in '68. And there was one group of folks that were like, we love that statue. Another group that said, we hate the statue, it's got to go. And it came to that. And I see that same sort of energy here. I think we can find a more creative thing that we could do with that monument that honors it for the folks that honor it and moves it into perspective. What if it went to that Civil War site in Allendale and created a tourist spot instead of a highway in Allendale? What if it joined Uncle Jack in Baton Rouge in a museum setting, the good darky, and went down there where it could be? What if it was sold? I really believe the monument has to go now, and that's a new opinion for me. I'm saddened to see this divisiveness, and I agree. My family told me one story. I've met other families that have a different story of being abused throughout history, and when they see that, an artist could put lipstick on it, it would still remind them of centuries of abuse under that monument and what it stands for. It's got to move somewhere else, and it belongs on a historic Civil War site. Thank you so much. I appreciate your
Thank you. Last call for opinion, but did not wish to speak.